I worked on a haunted cargo ship in the Bering Sea. The captain's rules made me terrified. I never should have opened that door. The moment I did, a chill swept through me. It was unlike anything I'd felt before. The kind that grips your heart and doesn't let go. The cargo ship creaked all around me, a living entity of wood and steel. I had signed on for adventure, not for this waking nightmare. Mornings were routine. I would step onto the deck, the salty spray stinging my face, the air thick and cold. I loved the rhythm of the waves, the distant cries of gulls echoing above. But then came whispers, faint, almost imperceptible. They slithered through the air, crawling over my skin and making my heart race. Every evening, shadows danced in the corners of my cabin. The dim lights flickered, casting strange shapes that made me question my sanity. Objects would shift when no one was watching. A wrench would mysteriously relocate from the toolbox, or my jacket would end up hanging on the opposite side of the room. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the knot in my stomach told another story. And then there was the captain. His rules were terrifying. Never go below deck at night, he'd warn, his eyes cold as ice. The ship's history is not for the faint-hearted. It was more than a warning. It was a threat. Rumors twisted around the crew like a tightening noose. Some said the ship harbored the spirits of those who had vanished. Others spoke of a storm that didn't just steal lives, but swallowed souls. Sounds filled the night, scratches, like claws against metal, and a low moan that lingered in my ears. I'd catch my breath, staring into the blackness, heart racing. What was lurking just out of sight? I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding loudly in the silence. I felt eyes watching me, pressing against my back. Then it happened. A loud crash echoed through the ship, rattling my very bones. The lights flickered one last time and then went out. I was plunged into darkness. My breath quickened, panic clawing at my throat. Was I alone? Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, a slow, deliberate march, each step amplifying my fear. I felt a presence behind me, a cold that prickled my skin. The air thickened. I hesitated, torn between turning to face it or running. A shadow loomed, darker than the night around me. I was caught, paralyzed by dread. The whispers grew louder, ringing in my ears. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. Silence engulfed me. But then an answer. A low, guttural growl. Chilling me to the bone, I took a step back. But there was nowhere to go. "Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The growl morphed into a low, relentless hiss, twisting around me like a serpent. My heart raced in tandem with the pounding footsteps. They echoed closer, a rhythmic drumbeat that sent shockwaves through my body. I forced myself to move backward, limbs stiff and unresponsive, as if trapped in a waking dream. The shadow shifted, morphing into a massive figure that seemed to absorb light, a sickening darkness emanating from its very being. "Run!" a voice hissed from within the shadow. It was gruff and gravelly, layered with an inhuman rasp. "They come for you." I stumbled, my back colliding with a cold metal wall, and the unexpected impact sent a jolt of fear through me. I could barely think. Instinct kicked in. I spun on my heel, desperate to escape the creature that loomed before me. But the narrow corridor twisted like a labyrinth as I sprinted, my feet pummeling the steel floor. I risked a glance over my shoulder. To my horror, it had followed an ethereal form with elongated limbs and sunken features that seemed to shift and swell with the shadows around it. Hungry, searching, gasping for breath, I tore into the open deck, the air suddenly bracing against my skin. The sky above was a dark tapestry, clouds swirling like violent waves eager to consume the world beneath them. The previous senses of adventure and thrill evaporated, replaced by a suffocating dread. The storm was coming, but it was not the storm I feared the most. Whispers spiraled around me, rising in a crescendo. My mind raced. Where to go, where to hide? The lifeboats seemed a futile option. What use was escape when the ship was alive? I could hear laughter not far off, high-pitched and mocking, echoing from the shadows of the bow. It chilled my skin and wrapped around my spine, igniting the primal instinct to flee. Just then, the lights flickered back on, casting eerie shadows that stretched and pulsed. There was movement on the deck, a pair of figures, impossibly still, eyes glinting like polished obsidian. They stared at me with a gaze that felt all too familiar. Crew members. But they looked wrong, distorted and vacant. Uncanny grins plastered across their faces. "Join us," they crooned in unison. Their voices a riot of dissonance that clawed at my sanity, and I turned away, trying to shake off their inviting call. It was like a siren's song, pulling me toward the edge of the ship, toward the maw of the raging sea below. A tremendous crash of thunder exploded overhead, illuminating the figures like specters in the night, revealing their rotting uniforms, tarnished name tags rusting into decay. "Help!" I screamed, my voice swallowed by the storm and echoed back by the laughing wind. I darted toward the stairs leading to the bridge, nearly slipping on a wet patch. The growling voice from below, now more insistent, shouted, "They are not who they seem." I burst into the bridge, slamming the door behind me. The dim light revealed charts strewn across the table, all of them marked with familiar yet haunting names of missing ships. I wasn't the first. As I caught my breath, realization dawned. The captains of those vessels must have met the same fate. My heart sank as the consequences of being ensnared by the ship's curse hit me like a wave. I staggered back, the walls swirling, my reality warping as the laughter grew louder just outside. Flashes of lightning illuminated the periphery, revealing faces peering in through the window's lost souls. Their mouths twisted in eternal grins, eyes hollow and searching. They reached for me, hands outstretched through the glass, fingers ink black, forcing me to confront what I could become. Then the door rattled violently, and the laughter faded into a low, sinister murmuring. "You cannot escape. You belong to us now." My breath faltered. My gaze darted to the microphone in front of me. A frantic thought crossed my mind. I had to warn the crew, to get them out before it was too late. With shaking hands, I reached for the radio, but before I could press the button, the lights flickered again, this time, a deep crimson. The bridge plunged into an unnatural silence. As I sat frozen, the door flew open, slamming against the wall. A figure surged through the threshold, drenched in darkness, clutching something grim in their grasp. An all-consuming fear paralyzed me, and I struggled to move as the reality of the situation crashed down around me. What they held was a heart, still pulsing and glistening in the dim light. A heartbeat synchronized to mine. "Time us up," they whispered, and I felt my own heart race faster in sheer terror. "You'll make a fine addition to our crew." And then, just as I was about to scream, the lights went out again, and I was swallowed by the dark, the heartbeat echoing in the depths of my soul. The darkness cloaked me, smothering every thought, every instinct to fight. I was trapped within a void where time itself seemed to stretch, and the insistent heartbeat resonated louder, a sinister metronome punctuating the silence. Fear gripped my throat, strangling the words I desperately wanted to scream. My pulse quickened in an instinctive battle with the growing dread that coiled around me like a serpent ready to strike. "Do you feel it?" the figure taunted, their voice echoing through the emptiness. "It beckons to you, calling you home." Then, a flicker of light broke the oppressive darkness. An eerie glow emanated from the heart in their grasp, illuminating twisted shadows that danced along the walls. I was not alone. Behind the figure, phantoms emerged from the corners, lumbering slowly, their forms shifting and rippling like oil on water. It was a grotesque parade of lost souls, faces twisted in anguish, forever frozen in a masquerade of despair. "Join us," they murmured in unison. their voices an unsettling melody, harmony existing only in their wretched cacophony. The shadows crept closer, wrapping their spectral hands around my shoulders, pulling me toward that dreadful heart. "Don't let them take you," clawed through the haze of my terror. I tried to wrest myself free, but the grip tightened. I could feel their icy breath against my skin, reeking of rot and despair. I looked back at the figure, whose identity remained shrouded in darkness. Their outstretched hand beckoned, fingers curling into my reality, an invitation into the void. With one desperate lunge, I dodged aside. I stumbled backward, hitting the table and sending charts scattering like disturbed leaves. It was my precious moment to escape that slim, glimmering chance. Panic ignited my instincts, and I darted past the shadowy figures, weaving through their outstretched arms and desperate wails. "Leave me," I shouted, my voice cracking, pleading for sanity to penetrate the realm of nightmares. In the chaos, I lunged for the door, slamming it shut, pressing my back against the cold metal, heart hammering against my chest. The shadows battered against the door, their incessant whispers worming into my ears. "You cannot hide," they hissed, "you belong to us." As if to punctuate their words, a terrible crash echoed outside, followed by the rain screaming against the hull in a mad symphony. The ship rattled beneath me, a living entity in the throes of rage. I glanced toward the windows, still fortified against the malevolence outside, but the hints of movement peeked through gleaming eyes, horrific and alive, watching with insatiable hunger. They glimmered like shards of obsidian. Captivating and terrifying, I grasped my breath, forcing myself to think. The window, break it with something. I searched frantically, grabbing a heavy metal chart holder. But before I could act, the handle shuddered as the relentless force outside pushed against the door like a tempest. Then, with a deafening crash, the door flew inward, splintering apart. The figure stood at the threshold, now clearer with each flash of lightning. It had a face lined with centuries-old sorrow, a captainess hat perched atop its head, tarnished and falling apart, and eyes that seemed to consume every source of light, swirling with unfathomable darkness. "Join us," it rasped again, that predatory invitation. "You will sail with us for eternity." Before I could react, the figures descended upon me, tendrils of smoke mingled with the solid forms of the damned. They swirled around, pulling me toward the threshold of oblivion, the heartbeat matching the relentless rhythm of my own fear. I swung wildly with the chart holder, striking one of them, its ghastly face transforming into a mask of hatred. But even that was a fleeting victory. I stumbled backward again, adrenaline surging as desperation clawed at my insides. "I won, succumb," I screamed, and in a final, reckless act, I hurled the holder into the luminous heart still pulsing at the figure's side. Chaos erupted. The heart erupted in blinding light, and with it, an unholy wail pierced the air, a symphony of tortured spirits clamoring in resounding agony. As if struck by a bolt of malevolence unleashed from the heart, the shadows recoiled, but the figure lunged forward, eyes ablaze with fury. "You fool!" Before it could finish, the heart exploded into 1,000 shards, each one a fragment of torment, illuminating the darkened room. I barely processed what had happened as I was thrown backward in the blast, the force knocking the wind from my lungs. Then, as silence engulfed me again, I lay in the wreckage, dazed. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but the oppressive air thickened, and the wails returned. This time, they were closer. My heart raced anew, but the horror was not finished. The floor began to pulse beneath me, a sickening rhythm that matched every heartbeat echoing in my ears. Fear coursed through me as I realized I was not alone in my dark sanctuary. Shadows surged, whispering madness in a language I could not understand, pulling me in. I reached out, grasping for anything solid to cling to. And then, with a spine-chilling chill, the lights flickered back on, revealing the twisted forms of crew members gathering around me, eyes wide, their grins stretching impossibly across their faces. "Welcome back," they sang out, a dissonant choir that resonated within my bones. And suddenly, it dawned on me, the ship hadn't called me to join its crew. It had brought me back to take someone else's place. As the black-eyed figures leaned closer, I felt the boundaries of my sanity fraying, reality dissipating around me. "Your time is over," the captain echoed once more, holding the remnants of the heart, now congealing and dark ominous. "Alive?" The question burned on my lips, but before I could utter it, a horrifying truth dawned. The ship was not just cursed. It thrived on lifeblood. And beneath the shadows of the crew, beyond the door I thought was barricaded, I felt them drawing nearer, the ones from the depths of the sea below. "Who will you become?" They whispered as the world spun, and darkness enveloped me. The weight of their words settled like a shroud around my throat, suffocating any hope I clung to. The crew's grinning faces twisted grotesquely in the bright white light, shadows lengthening like sinister sentinels along the walls. I felt trapped, the walls narrowing, the very air charged with an unholy energy that pulsated with every beat of the heart beneath the floor, a heartbeat that merged with my own, quickening in a symphony of dread. "Your time is over," the captain repeated, stepping closer, his hollow eyes boring deep into my soul. There was an unsettling familiarity about the crew, faces I'd seen in fleeting moments, a flicker here, a shadow there, but now they stood as solid as the moonlight spilling through jagged glass panels, reflecting every fragment of despair that hovered in the air. "Join us," they chorused again in unison, voices intertwining into something monstrous, a tangible force that pulled at my mind like fingers of ice clawing through the wool of my last vestiges of reason. The laughter echoed, bouncing around the room, wrapping around me like a tightening noose. Each chuckle resonated with a horror that seemed to suck the warmth from my very core. That I stumbled backward, fighting against the throng, desperate for an escape. My hand grazed a fragment of the heart, still throbbing on the ground, flickering with a pulse that radiated malevolent energy. In that moment, clarity struck. The heart was a tether, connecting the crew to whatever cursed fate bound them to this vessel. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cutting through their discordant melodies. "What do you want from me?" The words were desperate, the plea wrapping around the shadows, momentarily halting their advance. "Sacrifice," the captain sneered, the words curling with malice. "You have been chosen, offered as the tribute to awaken us." The ground shook violently beneath me, and I struggled to maintain my balance as scattered shards of the heart around the room began to drift and swirl, drawn together by an unseen force. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor, letting loose a damp, echoed moan from the ship, as if awakening from a deep slumber. Instinct screamed within me this was not merely a ship, not just an aggregation of wood and metal. It was a creature, a malignant entity intertwined with the myriad souls it had consumed over decades, maybe centuries. I could feel the ship breathe, a long-held sorrow whispering through the timbers, the very walls drenched in the anguish of all those it had claimed. "Foolish wretch," one phantom of the crew hissed, emerging in a flash of luminous despair, its fingers extending toward me, clawing at the edges of my mind. Without thinking, I grabbed another piece of the shattered heart, a chunk jagged and pulsing wildly in my palm. With primal instinct, I hurled it across the room, catching the visage of the nearest crew member, a young girl with hollowed cheeks and dark, sunken eyes. Upon contact, the heart fragment exploded, showering the room in an ethereal glow. The girl let out a scream that seemed to fracture time itself, splintering through the air. The other crew members recoiled in horror, their forms flickering and wavering like candle flames caught in a gust of wind. "Do not destroy what binds us," the captain roared, his voice rising above the cacophony, a storm gathering in his tone. "The heart is our lifeblood. Without it, we are nothing." "Then let it die," I spat in defiance, the adrenaline coursing through my veins fueling my resolve. I lunged for another piece, my hands trembling as I prepared to break their tether once and for all. But the shadows surged, wrapping tightly around my limbs, drawing me in with their piercing whispers. "You cannot escape," they called out. "We are eternal, an endless cycle of despair." As muffled wails echoed, a new sound intermingled, rising from deep within the ship. It burbled and gurgled, a grotesque laughter emerging from beneath the deck. The vessel quaked violently, waves crashing against its hull, revealing the hideous reality below the surface. Sinking in the depths were horrific shapes writhing and clawing, creatures born of nightmare, their glistening eyes drawing closer with each pulse of agony that I staggered backward, hard in my throat as they clawed at the edge of my vision, twisted figures long forgotten, faces eerily familiar among the grotesque, the same faces I had fleetingly seen, those missing from records, those forgotten by time. "Join us," they begged, their voices intertwining in haunting harmony with those of the crew. A desperate symphony that reverberated through the chamber. In that moment of horrorous embrace, clarity struck me once more. The walls weren't just of wood and metal, they were flesh and bone. A continuation of the damned. The ship and its desultory crew were alive, thriving on the souls it snatched, and any one of them could easily slip into my place. They had lured me here, a desperate offering to satisfy their insatiable hunger, that I reached for the last remnants of strength, knowing I had to act before it was too late. With a fierce howl of defiance, I hurled any remaining shards of the heart into the dark, churning abyss of the ship, where shadows surged forth, hungry for the remnants of their history. As the ship screeched in agony, the crew screamed, the cacophony clashing with the horrifying laughter rising from the depths. I ran, heart pounding, toward the door, but it slammed shut before me. A solid barrier reinforced with shadows, pulsating like the dread that filled my gut. Then, through the shrieks and roars of lost souls entwined in despair, a single voice emerged, dripping with insidious intent. "You cannot escape your fate." I spun, and gasped in horror as the crew members reformed around me, their features distorting into a grotesque mask of unity. I was surrounded once more, the ship tremoring beneath me, and from the shadows of despair, I realized the depths below were rising. The creatures of the deep were no longer waiting. They were hungry for the sacrifice the ship craved, and then, with a sickening realization, I understood. I was the final offering, and surrounded by that unfathomable darkness, I was just about to become a part of the ship's twisted legacy. With a desperate scream lodged in my throat, I prepared to fight. But against what? The darkness surged forth, and the last thing I saw was that terrible captain, smiling wide as the shadows enveloped me, drawing me into their silken embrace. And just like that, the light flickered out. In the suffocating grip of darkness, time lost all meaning. I tried to flail, to scream, but the shadows wrapped around me like a shroud, stifling every instinct to fight or flee. The laughter of the crew churned around me, morphing into a grotesque chorus that filled the air with an unbearable tension. Each chuckle seemed to draw nearer, resonating in my soul and distorting my reality. Suddenly, I was thrown into a flash of vibrant yet terrifying memories, glimpses of faces, of laughter twisted into screams, a never-ending loop of torment. They swirled around me in the void, each apparition illuminated momentarily in the flickering darkness. A mother clutching her child, a sailor with bloodied hands, and the hollow-eyed girl, her features now slickened with laughter rather than despair. I heard their stories whispered as if bold enough to claw through the shadows that bound me. They begged for release, for some semblance of peace, each plea echoing through my mind, collapsing under the weight of their torment. Desperate, I reached deep within, grasping the darkness as if it were tangible, searching for some spark of light amid the suffocation. The ship pulsated beneath me, its heartbeat now a ferocious drumbeat, quickening and angrier, as though it could sense my unwillingness to succumb to its forces. The very air felt alive, saturated with regret and sorrow, and although I was surrounded by shadows, the walls vibrated, echoing a maddening cacophony of the forgotten souls trapped within. The captain emerged from the void, his visage illuminated by a curse-shaped glimmer. "You think you fight against the inevitable, wretch?" His tone dripped with twisted glee. "You are merely fueling the cycle." I focused on the small remnants of resolve remaining inside me. The walls of this living nightmare were not only a vessel. They were a beast that thrived on fear, agony, and despair, all attributes now rising within me like bile. The thought settled like concrete in my stomach, a sickening realization. The ship's very existence was tethered to my suffering. Once again, I felt the dark tendrils undulating around me, molding and transforming, ready to bear down against my will. Summoning every ounce of courage, I focused on the siren song of memories, the moments of joy, love, and laughter I had experienced before stepping onto this cursed ship. Suddenly, a glimmer of radiant energy erupted from my core, spreading moments like wildfire. A blinding light shot through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the horrid faces of the crew warped by the very essence of the ship. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of their true forms, lost spirits, once vibrant, now trapped in the fabric of despair. They writhed, recoiling from the light that burned against them, a specter against their dark tapestry of life. My heart raced as I fed off the brightness within, feeling the shadows shriek and writhe, desperate to conceal their truths. But the captain, unfazed, thrust his hands toward the light. "You cannot banish us, you cannot escape. This is merely the beginning." The ground shook again, more violently this time, as cracks spidered across the unseen surface beneath. I wavered, grounding myself amidst the turmoil, realizing I was awakening not just their hunger, but something primal within the ship. The air grew thick and feverish. I had roused the very soul of the vessel, urging it to stir like a sinister giant awakening from centuries of slumber. An overwhelming sense of impending doom enveloped me as the shadows began to coalesce, forming grotesque tendrils of flesh that twisted with a menacing intent. I hesitated momentarily, pondering if I had unleashed something worse than the crew itself. Had I awakened a terror beyond human comprehension? And then, a bone-chilling howl erupted from the depths. The laughter twisted into a cacophony of rage, the ship heaving like a wounded beast as its very foundation shifted. From the inky depths below, something began to rise, a shadowy mass slowly surfacing, broad and ominous, a grotesque substance that whispered secrets of the damned. "Feed it," the captain hissed, a manic glint in his eye as he extended his arms toward the darkness. "Surrender. It craves a form, a host." In that terrible moment, I felt it, the unmistakable pull of expectancy surrounding me, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. I was not just the vessel of life. I was the bearer of whatever horror awaited me, the ultimate tribute. Panic surged through my veins, and I clawed at my surroundings, fighting against the tide of darkness that threatened to engulf me whole. With one last act of desperation, I unleashed a force that erupted from within, a surge of memory, of everything that had once anchored me in the light. But the shadows answered, surging back more ferociously than before. The monstrous shape below readied itself, and I was forced backward, flung against the wall as shadows converged, enacting the desires of the malevolent entity that had fed for centuries. And in that final instant, I realized I was no longer in control. I had become a part of their nightmarish realm, a shadow drifting in the void, awaiting my fate. It was then that everything went dark, not just for me, but for the world outside, as the ship descended into a churning abyss, hungry and irrevocably alive. And suddenly, there was silence. The raucous echoes of despair faded, swallowed whole. It was then that I felt it, a searing pain igniting within, a tether pulling me from the depths of darkness. I was the final offering. And as the captain's horrid face loomed over me one last time, I understood with dread that I was merely the beginning of something far more sinister. Then I was consumed. The abyss snapped shut around me, the weight of oblivion pressing down, crushing out all sound. I could feel the remnants of existence slipping away like grains of sand through my fingers. I had become nothing more than a thought suspended in time, reaching out desperately for something to breathe, to feel, anything other than this entrapment. And no sooner had the darkness enveloped me than I was propelled back into the realm of reality with a violent rush, gasping as if I had emerged from deep under turbulent waters. But this was not the deck of the cargo ship. I was lying on a cold stone floor, the chill penetrating my very bones. The faintest hint of amber light flickered in the distance, slashing through the dense shadows, bathing the space in an unsettling glow. Struggling to push myself up, I shivered, realizing I was no longer in the presence of the crew or the captain. A part of me instinctively knew I had crossed some threshold, but the remnants of dread lingered like cobwebs in my mind. Was I still part of the ship, or had I been cast into some new horror? As my senses sharpened, I became aware of soft whispers weaving through the air, curling around me like tendrils of smoke. They were hushed, fearful tones that filled the shadows with secrets I could not grasp. I could see them now, the specters from the ship, not just the crew, but a parade of lost souls, each dragging an invisible burden of pain. Their hollow eyes searching for something in the dimness. Confusion churned in my gut as I scrambled to my feet, trying to find purchase on the unforgiving ground. I turned, scanning my surroundings. High, arching ceilings loomed above, their surfaces slick with moisture and mold. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, a constant echo that matched the irregular beating of my heart. The walls seemed to pulsate gently as though they were alive, changing with each breath. "Help us, please," a voice escalated into an urgent whisper, chilling my spine. The source was closer now. Wispy, diaphanous figures started to coalesce around me, their mouths moving in sync with the despairing chorus of cries. But as I tried to reach towards them, the forms flickered like faulty lighting, fading in and out of reality, leaving me grasping at phantoms. "What do you want?" I shouted into the thickening air, my voice echoing back like a taunt from unseen observers. "What do you need?" A chilling silence swallowed my words, and in that pause I felt it, a shift, an energy that wrapped around me, tightening like a noose. The shadows morphed, rising with a ferocity, bearing a glimmer of something I'd seen before, deeper than mere darkness. A ghastly hunger. "Feed us," they whispered in unison, their voices echoing around me. A cacophony of desperation that ignited the fears that had lain dormant since I boarded the cursed ship. "You are the vessel now." I stumbled back, my heart racing as I retreated towards the flickering light. "No, I am not. I will not be a part of this." But the shadows surged, pinning me in their embrace. Suddenly, the temperature dropped drastically, and I felt a flicker of awareness from deep within, a presence intertwining with my thoughts, wearing my own voice like a grotesque mask. It laughed, nascent and chaotic, ringing with both familiarity and malevolence. "This is your fate," it crooned. "You are intertwined with us now, forever feeding the whispers of the dark." The realization churned in my stomach. This was no mere haunt, no simple lingering of lost souls. I was a conduit, part of an unending cycle, a vessel not just for spirits, but for something worse, some primal force that hungered insatiably, always craving more. Suddenly, the shadows gave way, thrusting me into an even darker chamber where the air felt electric, crackling with anticipation. I stood in front of a vast, warped mirror, the surface murky and swirling with images of my past, the faces of those I loved twisting into grotesque reflections that mocked me. They reached out, hands pressed against the glass, silently pleading for help as terror filled their eyes. I stepped closer, trembling. My reflection twisted again, showing me not a victim, but blurring into the features of the captain, laughing maniacally while I stood there, transfixed. His penetrating eyes bore into me, laden with the knowledge of what I was about to become. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, glass flying outward like shards of agony. I tried to shield myself as the fragments rained down, but in their descent, I saw the truth of the damned. They were not just spirits. They were once human, each glass shard a piece of flesh holding memories of sorrow, laughter, and unspeakable despair. And as each piece shattered, the voices grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. "You must feed us," a primordial scream erupted from my throat. But the shadows closed in again, coiling tighter, the weight of their despair dragging me deeper into their voracious embrace. And then I saw it, the central shard that had neither shattered nor fallen. It pulsed steadily, alive with an eerie glow. It hummed a dark melody, and within its depths, the swirling images morphed into a single figure. A creature of indescribable horror, half-formed, beckoning me closer. Just as I reached out, a sudden rush of dread flooded over me, and the shadows shrieked in unison, their grip tightening painfully. I was torn between the monstrous allure of that glowing shard and the chorus of anguished souls filling my ears, lost in the chaos of it all. That in one blinding moment of clarity, I understood. I was the next piece of the jigsaw, the sacrificial lamb in a ritual older than time itself, a dread that transcended existence. And just as the shadows surged forward to consume me, the world imploded into unrelenting darkness. I was about to surrender to the abyss when a deafening roar erupted behind me, resonating through the cavernous chamber, shaking the very foundations. and illuminating the true horror that lurked in the darkness. In that terrifying split second, something lunged from the shadows so monstrous, so incomprehensible that even the shadows recoiled. My heart froze as I turned to face it, sealed in shadows yet undeniably alive. The thing from the deep was rising, and it was more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. "Your time has come," it roared, and I realized with paralyzing dread that the captainess' laughter echoed in the distance, malicious and triumphant. Before I could articulate the horror, I was pulled into the surge of the encroaching darkness, destined to become part of its nightmarish legacy, and I felt all hope shatter around me, like glass cascading in a storm of tragedy, spiraling downward into an unforgiving void. The last thing I saw was the malevolent shape lunging toward me, and I understood. There was no escape, and then there was nothing but blackness. The blackness folded like a heavy veil, yet it was a thick, oppressive silence that began to smother my consciousness. I was aware, strangely so, of a gradual shift, a return to the world, but one that was fervently laced with the unholy. My heart thumped violently against my chest, a primal instinct fighting against the all-consuming darkness trapping me in its clutches. When awareness seeped back, I found myself suspended, as if caught in a web spun from the very fibers of dread. Memory flickered. Hours? Days? Time had become an abstract concept. I wrestled against the phantoms that tightened their grip around me, pulling me, teasing me with promises of secrets and knowledge that came at the price of my very essence. Gradually, shapes began to emerge from the swirling gloom. My surroundings materialized, forming a malignant landscape reminiscent of the dark underbelly of the cargo ship. Grit and decay compounded around me. Rusted metal scaffolding loomed. Warped shadows flitted along crumbling walls as though life itself was woven into their very structure. But I was not alone. Their faces emerged from the mist, silent witnesses with hollow gazes, hands reaching toward me, mouths moving in a sunken, eternal scream, but no sound escaped their lips. It was disorienting, the realization that these weren't mere ghosts. They were fragments of something eldritch, writhing tapestries of sorrow and despair bound to this haunted space, their very existence tethered to an unspeakable grief. "Release us," they breathed in unison, their voices a haunting echo that curled around the edges of my sanity. "Share your pain?" I grappled with the inquiry, trying to find footing in the shapeless void of my fear. "What do you want with my pain?" As I stepped back, a pulsating mass flickered into existence before me. The colors shifted, not of this world, transitioning from velvety black to unnatural greens and purples, breaching the spectrum like a damned rainbow. It swirled, morphing into faces I recognized, shrouded in agony, their expressions twisted with a torment I tried to bury. "Mom?" I uttered, the word clawing its way out of my throat as the familiar figure appeared, interspersed with glimmers of recognition and fear. "Dad?" But their forms shifted, flickering like a TV screen on the verge of malfunction. They weren't true reflections but specters formed from memory, longing, and the yearning shadows that had taken root in the darkest corners of my heart. Tears swelled in my eyes as I clutched at the empty air, a noose tightening around every fiber of my being. "Stop it!" I shouted, a cry against the encroaching terror, but I was met only with an echoing chorus begging for mercy. "Feed us the darkness and we will guide you," they whispered, voices cascading like a mournful tide, each wave eroding my resolve. That I found myself drawn toward the pulsating mass, compelled by an urge nestled deep within the marrow of my bones. Suddenly, cold realization fell upon me like a thick blanket. The shadowy creatures were not asking for nourishment in the physical sense. They yearned for the very foundation of my soul, the shadows that clung to the dark recesses of my past, my guilt, my sadness, the screams I had long drowned. And it was there, amidst the thrumming pulse of their otherworldly longing, I felt them, a relentless hunger that twisted inside of me, darkening my consciousness, tempting me to surrender. But then, just as a flicker of resolve ignited within, the air thickened, charged with anticipation. The shadows receded momentarily, and from their depths emerged a figure broad-shouldered, masked in shadow, yet unmistakably human. The captain, his devilish grin cold and unyielding, appeared with a flourish. "You thought you could escape, didn't you?" he taunted, stepping forward as if the shadowy tendrils parted just for him. You're ours now. You can't battle what you've always feared. Panic surged anew as memories crashed into me. The anguishments I had locked away began to surface: the accidents, the childhood pains, the loss, and betrayal that had burst forth, overwhelming me like a torrent. I realized the captain wasn't simply a warden of this accursed place, he was part of it. A malignant force perpetuating this cycle of despair. Join us, he crooned, extending a hand that shimmered with the essence of tormented souls swirling around him. Embrace the darkness, and you too shall transcend. Instinctively, I recoiled, but behind me, the people I loved reached out, their faces a cacophony of pleading and desperation. The essence of their pain intermingled violently, and I could feel the orbit of my resolve imploding under the pressure. As I spun, suffocating under the accusations and cries, the captain's laughter erupted, drowning out all rational thought. And just when all seemed lost, when the darkness crowded in like a suffocating tide, a blinding flash erupted from the depths of despair, a light that clashed violently with the darkness surrounding me. No! The captain roared, his visage twisting dangerously as he shielded himself from the brightness. You can't do this. You belong to the abyss. But the light grew more intense, crashing over me, and doubt began to flicker in the shadows. I felt the energy race through my veins like a bolt of lightning, forging a new path, a fragmented fire igniting hope amidst the somber dirge. The figures of my loved ones surged toward this light, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows disintegrated, revealing a doorway, a warped portal strewn with shimmering outlines of salvation. But the captain screamed, that ghastly sound striking terror into the pit of my stomach. You'll never be free. In that breath, as I flung myself toward the beckoning light, the shadows returned in a vengeful wave, pulling me back, desperately trying to ensnare me in their abyssal embrace, howling in fury at the flicker of light that dared to challenge their dominion. Panic rippled through me, the light stretching tantalizingly out of reach. But the moment was fleeting, and as I glanced over my shoulder, the captain's eyes blazed with fury, his features warping into something truly horrific. Your choice will decide your fate, he hissed, teeth sharpened and glistening like a predator as the shadows coiled around him. Just as I was about to cross the threshold, a deafening crack echoed through the chamber, a cataclysmic rupture of energy bursting forth in a blinding inferno. And then, everything shattered into chaos. Whether it was my scream or the captain's rage that tore the fabric of reality, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that a final choice lay before me, one that would seal my fate forevermore, before I could grasp the weight of the decision. An unnatural force yanked me back into the depths, plunging me downward into the visceral, throbbing darkness that hungered for my very soul as I disappeared beneath the waves of despair. A haunting echo lingered in my ears: choose wisely, for not everyone can return. And the light dimmed, flickering out like a candle against the wind. I was swallowed by the obsidian void, the sensation of descent disorienting as time warped around me. Everything I had come to know, every shred of reality, felt tenuous, dissolving like a breath on a cold windowpane. The cacophony of my own heartbeat rang in my ears, drowning out the whispers of the damned. All that remained was the harsh conviction that I was tumbling deeper into the abyss. When the pull of nothingness subsided, I landed sharply onto a hard, slick surface that sent ripples through the damp air. I pushed myself up, gasping, realizing I was no longer in the chamber pouring with shadowed figures nor faced with the captain's mocking grin. I lay in a narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that swung with a menacing creak. My heart hammered as reality settled in like ice upon my skin. I was still entangled within the cursed ship. The metallic scent of rust and decay enveloped me. I crawled forward, the ground slick beneath my fingers. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, teasing with the threat of the unseen, whispering fervently in a language I dared not understand. A deep chill settled over me as I crept through the corridor, aware of my own breaths, each exhale sounding like a funeral dirge. But the corridor began to feel alive, pulsing rhythmically as if drawn from the heartbeat of the vessel itself. I could be sworn I heard low moans echoing along the walls, a haunting echo of the lost souls trapped within this metallic tomb. My instincts screamed that not only were those trapped souls clawing for release, they were demanding retribution for the torment of their unending existence. "Help us!" The plea silently pierced the air, wrapping around me like chains of despair. I rushed further down the corridor, urging myself not to look back. I had to escape this labyrinth of horror, the captain's laughter rippling in the distance like a malevolent tide. As I stumbled deeper into the belly of the ship, an overwhelming sense of dread coursed through me. Flickers of light caught my attention, strange symbols scrawled across the walls, glistening as if steeped in blood. They pulsed under my fingertips, exuding a vibrating warmth that thrummed with an otherworldly energy. I could almost hear them whispering, content to taunt me with promises of power, of control over the darkness. "Join us," they urged, voices interlacing like whispers brushed on the wind, the temptation wrapping around my heart, inviting me to surrender. But then a louder voice broke through the reverie, thick with rage and lament. "Don't listen," it screamed, resonating from the far end of the hall, a voice no longer hollow, but urgent. "You don't know what binds them. They will consume you. You must." The voice was abruptly drowned out by a gut-wrenching crash, reverberating through the hall like thunder. Panic surged anew as shadows coalesced into grotesque forms before me. The suffocating darkness swirled at the corners of my vision, taunting me with specters of twisted faces and clawed hands, and then I recognized her, a figure obscured in half-light. Her features were haunting yet familiar. It was Sarah, a colleague who had vanished weeks ago along with the others. Her eyes were hollow, sunken in the dark, but they brimmed with an unquenchable terror etched into her every pore. "Run," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper as she raised a trembling hand to point toward an exit shrouded in ominous haze. "They don't just want your chaos. They want to claim you, use you to reshape this plane, all of us. You have to leave before it's too late." Before I could respond, the shadows lunged at her, twisting around her frail form. They pulled her back, and for a moment, her eyes met mine, a silent scream echoing through our fleeting connection. I could feel their hunger swelling, the despair dripping from her very being, a somber feast that would revive them if I did nothing. "Sarah," I shouted, but my voice drowned in the thrumming of darkness. I stepped forward, desperate to help, but the shadows, thick and inescapable, rippled in warning as they tightened their hold around her. "Go," she screamed, her voice carrying the weight of agony as the darkness swallowed her. "Don't let them take you, too." With a sudden burst of energy, I spun toward the exit, a raw instinct urging me to escape, but the shadows before me congealed, shifting into a wall of eyes and mouths, coalescing into a grotesque reflection of my deepest fears. "Leave her," a guttural voice hummed from the mass, echoing with malevolent intent. "Join us instead. Embrace your pain, and we shall show you your true power." But the horror within me ignited a spark of rebellion. They would not claim me, not while I had the remnants of hope still flickering inside. I surged forward, adrenaline fueling my every action, the air thick with an electric haze as I pushed against the dark entanglements. Yet just as I reached the exit, stepping into the faint light, an icy hand seized my ankle, pulling me back, a visceral, anguished howl ripping through the air. It was the shadows, the remnants of tormented souls, desperately grasping for their last tether of humanity. "The Captain won't allow a single escape," they screeched, their rage swelling to engulf the last vestiges of my resolve. The ship shuddered violently, metallic groans vibrating through the core of the vessel, and as I strained against the grip, a sharp crack echoed, an ominous sound like a spine splintering under pressure. My heart raced, panic interwoven with desperation, the realization dawning that this was no longer just a choice about survival. My fate and the fates of those lost hung in the balance. Just as I summoned the strength to break free, the ship lurched once more, and a blinding flash ignited around me, momentary disorientation piercing through the darkness. I felt the cold bite of the shadows slip away as if drawn back, but not before an unfathomable wave of despair swept over me, pulling me downward into an inescapable vortex. In that fleeting moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I glimpsed the captain, his eyes glimmering with unfathomable malice, beckoning toward me from the dark depths of the shattered corridor. "Take my hand," he offered, a new hunger reflected in his gaze. This is the only way to survive. The realization hit hard. To take his hand meant succumbing to the darkness, surrendering my will, while to reject him meant risking everything. For the ship was collapsing, and I was ensnared between worlds. As the light and darkness twisted violently around me, I felt the weight of a choice whose consequences would ripple far beyond my understanding, and then, before I could decide, the world before me shattered once more, plunging me into a swirling maelstrom of chaos, my vision reeling beneath the crushing imprint of darkness, its tendrils reaching hungrily into my very soul. That I stood at the edge of salvation and damnation, and as the abyss swallowed all that was familiar, one final thought lingered. Painfully, what if I was already too late? The void released me violently, propelling me into a new realm that thrummed with a cold, malevolent energy. I gasped, chest burning, as my surroundings coalesced into a sinister tableau, a room overflowing with relics of regret, each object a testament of past sins swirling like mist around me. Rotted cargo crates, split and decaying, lined the walls, and my senses were assaulted by the stench of congealed oil and aged wood. The air thickened with a palpable heaviness that threatened to collapse around me, and my fingertips grazed the edges of a faded photograph. Ensnared in the debris, a crew member's haunted gaze met mine, eyes already devoid of hope, as if he could sense the entrapment that awaited. Questions pulsed through my mind. How many had been trapped in this place? What were their final thoughts as the shadows claimed them? The memories of the ship's crew, now fractured souls, danced on the edge of my mind, each whisper melding into a chaotic symphony of despair. Suddenly, within the cacophony, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It resonated from somewhere within the walls, urgent and insistent. I moved cautiously, the damp floor creaking beneath my weight. Each step seemed to echo my mounting fear, amplifying my sense of isolation as darkness coiled menacingly around me, beckoning. But for all its allure, there was no warmth in its embrace, only a chilling promise of loss. As I approached the source of the sound, my breath turned shallow, an instinctual warning prickling at the base of my spine. The tapping morphed into frantic scratching, like nails clawing at wood from beyond the veil. I pressed my ear to the cool surface of the wall, heart racing, feeling the vibrations thrumming through the structure. It was alive, pulsating with anguish, and somehow, I could sense the presence of countless fingers trying to breach the barrier between worlds. "Help us!" the whispers called out, a desperate litany that twisted in my gut, and without thinking, I rapped my knuckles sharply against the wood in response. The scratching ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it felt ominous, as if the ship itself had inhaled, awaiting my next move, and then, as if it had been waiting for my signal, the wall before me rippled. A sickening distortion spread across the surface, the scratched lines turning to fleeting images of a man, ragged and torn, his face twisted in anguish, hot tears streaming down his cheeks as he screamed silently for aid. I stumbled back, fear flooding my veins, as realization sank in. These were the spirits trapped within the ship, doomed to wander its cursed corridors, no longer human but shadows of what they once were. I turned to flee when a sudden, blinding light flooded the room, momentarily illuminating the haunting figures that had gathered. Their misty forms coalesced into a once familiar scene, the crew celebrating some long-forgotten triumph. But the celebration twisted grotesquely, the spirits contorted with rage and sorrow, the scene collapsing into screams, suffocating laughter spiraling into a cacophony of anguish. Then, amid the spiraling images, I caught a glimpse of her, the captain's daughter, whom I had helped deliver provisions weeks prior. Her face, once serene, was now a mask of terror as she was pulled into the shadows, still attempting to scream, her voice a mere echo within the chaos that enveloped her. I staggered forward, desperate to help yet paralyzed by fear, as the laughter twisted into mockery, telling me that my efforts were futile. "No one escapes," sang the shadows, their voices rising like a thunderous tide that consumed everything. "You will join her. We will all reshape this world together." The air grew dense with their malevolence, pressing me against the wall of the somber chamber. A dark mist seeped from the cracks, swirling like a living entity, ensnaring my senses in waves. I fought against the growing despair that threatened to blanket my mind, but it whispered relentlessly, caressing my doubts and fears. What if they're right? It teased. What if you're already where you belong, embraced by those who know your torment? Desperation pushed me forward, fingertips brushing against the wall, seeking something, anything to orient myself in this nightmare. And right there, at the threshold of the haunting shadows, a glimmer of discernible truth emerged, a weathered diary half buried among the rubble. Its pages stained yet legible, ink swirling with wind-spun tales of the damned. As I pried it free, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, breath crystallizing in frantic clouds. The shadows recoiled, shrieking as if the words contained within posed a threat too great to bear, their fury mounting as I flipped it open. The pages fell to one particular entry, ink still ripe with desperation. I beg you, do not follow him to the abyss. He seeks to bind your soul, one gift in exchange for another. A scream sliced through the air, a horrific chorus, as if the entire ship reverberated with rage. The captain himself appeared at the edge of the room, eyes glowing with the fervor of a predator cornering its prey. Enough, he bellowed, voice like thunder, reverberating in my bones. I could feel the energy in the room shift, the shadows swirling faster, anticipation thickening the air. He stepped closer, extending his hand, a dark promise woven into his claw-like grip. Join me and escape this torment. Together, we can unleash their pain upon the world. The choice is yours. Time froze as I stood there, diary trembling in my hand, the weight of eternity resting upon my decision. But beyond that decision loomed a realization that sent a chill through my core. The tapping had escalated to a feverish rhythm, and as I turned, I saw the shadows surge, coalescing into the shapes of all those lost, their twisted faces watching me, pleading for deliverance yet warning against the abyss. I was teetering on the precipice of despair and defiance, as behind me, a deeper shadow began to coalesce, a far darker presence building into something far more menacing. And in that moment of frozen time, I realized my choice had consequences far greater than survival. I had to decide not just for myself, but for all that remained trapped here. When I looked back at the captain, his sinister smirk widened, revealing an empty chasm in place of his once vivacious soul. It's not about the choice you make, he grinned, but the fate that awaits if you choose wrong. The shadows lunged, and the walls screamed, twisting reality into a nightmarish blur as every brief moment distorted with fate. Suddenly, with a pulse of cold darkness, I felt the floor give way beneath my feet. Would I leap back into that raging torrent, into the waiting embrace of lost souls, or would I be dragged down into the depths of dread, forever lost to the cycle of despair? As the abyss opened wide, I realized only one truth remained certain. I was not the only one falling. I stood on the precarious edge of existence, teetering between the abyss and the incalculable weight of the shadows, each whisper entwining itself around my desperate thoughts. The captain's laughter echoed through the dimly lit chamber, each rich note filled with that dark, undisguised glee that made my skin crawl. His twisted invitation hung in the air, coiling itself around me as my heart thundered like a war drum. Revealing the truth far too late, I was ensnared in a trap woven meticulously from self-doubt and despair. But as the shadows surged toward me with hungry tendrils, I recalled the words from the diary still clutched tightly in my grasp, etched in my mind with growing resolve. I beg you, do not follow him to the abyss. The truth resounded in the pit of my gut. The choice was mine alone to reshape this tale of horror that threatened to reclaim not just me, but the very remnants of lost souls echoing through the haunted vessel. Turning, I faced the captain, whose grin widened impossibly, revealing a maw that beckoned with darkness. Join me, he taunted, feigning warmth. You can save them. Together, we can harness their pain and reshape this world, bring life to their whispers. You will be their savior. Or their tormentor, I responded, more resolute than I had felt since my arrival on this cursed ship. The swirling shadows recoiled momentarily, hesitation dancing across their spectral forms. They deserve peace, not to be pawns in your malevolent game. Through their dark expressions, I saw it then, the flicker of choice that had haunted them eternally. They were not merely spirits to be used as conduits, but beings who had once lived, who had once held dreams that now lay shattered by his greed. With the very essence of my will knitting itself into action, I hurled the diary at his feet, watching as it erupted in tendrils of light golden threads winding through the shadows, illuminating them like stars amidst darkness. The captain snarled, rage transforming his shadowy visage. "You dare defy me?" The shadows surged forward, clawing ferociously, as if they sought to reclaim their power, but I wouldn't yield. "No!" I shouted, heart pounding in perfect sync with the flickering glow and the shadows' swift advance. They paused, momentarily captivated. "You are free. You don't belong to him. Remember who you are." The words came out like a prayer, a plea that vibrated through the air and wrapped around the lost souls. I envisioned the faces of those whose anguish had been etched onto the very fabric of the ship, their eyes clear and cries mending the shattering echoes of despair. The shadows hesitated, flickering in confusion as if some invisible tug-of-war were occurring within their cores. I saw them, the captain's crew, lost to the darkness, drifting helpless between the realms of nightmares and reality. "Fight the darkness!" I screamed, praying for their release. "Remember what you were. Remember the love. Fight for the light." The shadows writhed violently in response, and for the slightest moment, I saw the faces of the crew emerge, fading forms wrestling against their chains of despair, the cries of forgotten laughter battling against the pull of complete oblivion. But then the captain's wrath Como swooped in like a storm, fists raised. "Fool! You think they'll listen to you? You're trapped, just like the rest of us." "It's not true," I countered, willpower surging anew. I mustered the last reserves of hope from my racing heart, channeling every promise of joy I could muster into a single, blinding light that burst from my core, radiating warmth through the freezing grip of despair. Suddenly, the shadows erupted into furious chaos, writhing violently as my light enveloped them. The entire chamber trembled, the walls vibrating as if they were alive. The very ship seemingly groaned under the weight of centuries of anguish, resonating with the spirits finally willing to fight. I surged forward into that incandescent glow, reaching out to the crew. The captain lifted his hand to shield his face, and with a howling roar, I felt the tide begin to turn. The crew moaned, a deep cacophony spiraling with every ounce of unity, entwining their energies, and the ship responded. Together, their voices entwined, echoing defiantly against the dark. "We are more than shadows, we are hope." Suddenly, the vessel shifted beneath our feet with a grating shudder like the sound of cracking ice, as if the very essence of the ship itself was buckling under the weight of the truth I had unearthed. "You belong to the darkness," the captain bellowed, desperation creeping into his tone, as I felt the chains constricting him begin to loosen. "No," I cried out as the light pushed back, expanding outward, chasing away the choking darkness. The shadows clung to him, but their strength faltered, their grasp weakened as hope poured forth in unbroken waves. I and the blinding pulse of energy surrounding us. I saw the captain's distorted eyes twist in anger, but it twisted into horror as the light erupted further, flooding the entire ship. "This isn't over. I will find you," he howled, and then his voice became a distant echo as he was consumed. The shadows evaporated into shimmering tendrils that burst like stars across the infinity, scattering away into the abyss I had feared for so long. The force of hearts united released the spirits. Their laughter, a sound I had feared was forever lost, now echoed through the air. They danced around me, swirling like rays of sunbeams breaking through the dark veil. And then, as the last glimmers of shadow slipped into nothingness, blissful silence reclaimed the room, and as the warmth of salvation washed over me, I collapsed, trembling. Each breath filled my lungs with a fresh start, a promise to never forget the lives tethered to that forsaken ship. But then I turned. The light began to fade, and the figures of the crew remained but a flickering memory, a blend of smiles above echoes of deep sorrow. Their presence dimmed, the golden light waned, and shadows rematerialized at the edges of my vision. "What?" I gasped, gripping the sides of the walls as darkness began to gather in fervent intensity. No, not again. Panic twisted in my chest as I realized the horrifying truth. It was not over yet. Just as I thought I could breathe, the ship groaned, lunging once more as if shaking awake from a long slumber. I stumbled back, battlements of the past spiraling into focus. Shadows, whispers, and laughter, a funeral song, rose to a crescendo. "Join us!" they cried, laughter echoing, their voices thickening like a fog that clung close, suffocating and familiar. I pulled my hands to my ears as a sickening realization sank in. Even freed, they lingered still, their memories, their stories, forever entwined with mine, clinging to the essence of the ship, and before I could wrench back reality, the cabin door flung open with a violent crash. My pulse quickened as a figure emerged, shimmering darkness pooling behind them like a living shadow, laughter at the edge of my consciousness. The same captain, his face grotesquely familiar, eyes ablaze with unending fury. "Did you think you could break your fate?" he hissed, those chilling words echoing ominously. "You can't escape what you truly are. You belong here, forever a part of the night. Now the shadows shall guide you, and this time, your own heart will echo their call." The shadows surged, and as they reached toward me, a dread realization coiled around my heart like a vice, and the last gasp of sanity began to slip through my fingers. "Join us!" their hungry whispers filled the room, drowning out my consciousness until all that remained was nothing but echoes. And even as I fought to wake from this haunting, even as I clawed against the darkness pooling within, the chilling truth settled in the marrow of my being: the ship was alive, and it would never let me go. As the shadows enveloped me, I realized the distance I thought I'd gained was just a twisted joke, and the final line of my fate lay before me, old and familiar, ready to ink my confession in these haunted halls. I became the captain of my own despair.